Hello, hi, and welcome back to the CIA declassified documents. This is the moment a lot of you guys have been waiting for. I've gotten a lot of comments over the last couple of years where I haven't been doing the documents, and I want to get back into it. So, first and foremost, the reason why I'm restarting these documents is because I realized a lot of people are still very interested in the topic that I've been covering, which is the Stargate files specifically. So I'll get more into that later. But I think it's important to note why I started getting involved in these documents in the first place, because I do feel like that is very important for kind of the energy where I'm covering these documents, okay? So, why I started doing the CIA declassified documents in the first place. If you guys are here from the very beginning, you'll probably already remember this. So, sorry for being repetitive, but if not, I do think it's important for the lore, okay? So, why I started getting into the CIA declassified documents in the first place is essentially because I have had paranormal experiences my entire life. And nobody ever had explanations for me for that. So, it was always very unsettling experiencing a lot of these paranormal things that I would just incessantly be gaslit about. So if you could imagine that, um, that's where the drive comes from, because I have had, precognitive dreams. I have had these, you know, literal mediumship experiences starting from childhood. So there are a lot of core memories of mine that are just so jarring that I vividly remember them, and I've just been thinking about them for the entirety of my existence. So naturally, I listened to the adults around me, you know what I mean? Like, I was being gaslit, nobody had answers for it. They told me I was making it up. So, I just kind of turned it off, I guess. I don't know how to explain that. Like, if you've ever had these experiences, especially as a child, especially being gaslit, like, that is something that can happen, which my research brain is so fascinated by the fact that we can kind of create these mental barriers of our own, which is a big point with experiencing the paranormal and understanding the other side. There's a quote, I believe it's by Henry Ford, and it says, "If you believe you can, you're right. And if you believe you can't, you're also right." So basically, it's like whatever your belief is, whatever you've created as this little box, that is like your boundary, okay? So these are things that I've learned in hindsight. Obviously, I didn't know that that was what was happening when I was a child. Um, but yeah, so fast forward, went to school, did the whole nine. I was in law school at the time. Ended up hating that, even though I was there on scholarship. I was doing fine technically, you know what I mean? But at what cost, really? So I withdrew, went to corporate, and then COVID hit. So when COVID hit and pretty much a lot of people lost their jobs, I lost my job after like a month or so because I was working as a recruiter who helps people find jobs. So nobody's really hiring amidst a global pandemic. So yeah, I was then fun employed, and that's when I started TikTok. And that's when I started talking about psychic things and understanding that there was a community of people who, did believe in this stuff and did understand that this stuff was real. So that's where I kind of started, because in my immediate IRL surroundings, um, in person, I didn't have anybody really that wanted to talk about this stuff. And it was very ostracizing to be so fascinated by this stuff and have no outlet for it. So that's where I started talking about all this stuff on TikTok. Okay. So doing really well in an academic setting, I was basically taught that any valid source would basically come from like a governmental agency or like a university or things like that, you know, those types of research institutions. And I did some quick searches, you know, I've had all the knowledge now from, you know, college and law school a little bit and whatnot, but I couldn't find any of the answers that I was looking for. You know what I mean? Like everything was basically gaslighting me again, just saying like, nope, none of this is real, haha. That's when I was like, okay, well, you know who would have some information on this if it was real? The government. The government would have some information on that if it was real. So that's when I decided I would look through the CIA declassified documents because I knew that the Freedom of Information Act is something that's in place to essentially keep the public in the know about the government because they're using our money. Okay. So for a second, we're going to get into like the FOIA of it all and what that means, why these documents are declassified, etc. So, in general, FOIA applies to pretty much every type of governmental project document, whatever it may be, unless it meets one of like the 9 exemptions. And there are certain like number of criteria that it has to meet in order to be released. So, namely, it has to have been, you know, worked on over 25 years ago for one. And one of the exemptions, by the way, is that it can't interfere with national security. Okay. So I think that's an interesting point that we're going to revisit later. Okay. But it's just really interesting to me that there are so many different caveats. You can go on the FOIA website and like read this statute in entirety. It's so wordy. But basically, what it means is that there's a law, a statute in place that basically holds the government accountable as best you ever could do that, to basically release the information that they have studied and I don't know, things that they have done using taxpayer money. Like we are the ones who fund all of this. So yes, of course we have a right to understand what's going on first and foremost. So next, what is Project Stargate? So Project Stargate is the governmental project, like the umbrella of everything that I talk about. And it basically has to do with human capabilities of the mind. And a lot of people in my comments don't really know much about this and they start talking about like MK Ultra and drugs and ruining people's lives. Listen, yeah, that's also a thing. Like MK Ultra is an entirely separate program. In Project Stargate, there were no drugs used at all. It was simply the power of the human mind, okay? But that's not to say the you know who hasn't done a lot of like really messed up things. So that's a whole other topic in and of itself, guys. I can't even tangent on that right now. There's too much. They're not known for being great people. I want to leave that. Obviously, I'm not saying we should trust the CIA. That's never once anything that I've ever said in my life, actually. The point being that taxpayer money was used to study all of this, okay? It was declassified only very recently. It was a classified project for decades. The scientists that worked on this couldn't tell anybody. They couldn't talk about this. So I want to emphasize that is the reason this all became declassified in the first place. It's not because the government was like, ooh, haha, like a lot of people claim that it could be like a psychological operation, like a psyop, like let's, you know, confuse them or something. Psyops do exist. Psychological operations for sure do exist. But all of these documents, all of this information from the CIA regarding Stargate specifically was released because the scientists who worked on these projects requested for them to be released. And that's part of the rules that there has to be like 3 people, I think, that request, or it has to be requested 3 times to be released to the public. So basically, there was a very big push from these scientists who spent so much time, like almost like their life's work, in these projects that they couldn't even talk about. So, of course, they want credit for their research naturally, but also things that they've discovered, you know? And I think that's so interesting. And one of them in particular, who I love, you guys might know, you might have seen some of the videos, Russell Targ. I love Russell Targ. I actually got to like virtually meet Russell Targ because I called him a daddy on a TikTok video that I made one time. And the APP, they thought it was like so funny. I got reached out to by them. They were like, that's hysterical. Like, do you want to meet him? I was like, I'm going to throw up. So I got to meet him and ask questions and things like that. But he still to this day is talking about psychic abilities, Russell Targ is. And by the way, I need to emphasize that Russell Targ co-invented the laser. Like the laser, okay? So we're not talking about like a bunch of random crackpots here. Like these people are actually very reputable in what they have done, but it's been twisted and they've tried to like decredit them. There's a lot of documentaries about all of this. I actually just recently watched Third Eye Spies again. So good. Russell Targ's documentary, love him. In that documentary, they talk a lot about all of the results. They talk about also why the program ended. Okay, we'll get into that later. But the point being, the documents that I talk about on my TikTok channel and here and everything are under the umbrella of Stargate. The reason for that is, again, because my interest started with psychic abilities and understanding how they work, why they work, what is going on here, as well as I feel that it might be one of the less controversial things that the CIA has done in respects of like, there aren't drugs, like they aren't killing people. Basically, what the CIA did, at least in the context that I have researched for the Stargate program specifically, they have contracted professionals who are interested in this work, who have been doing this work, who have the capacities and the education to understand what is going on here, which is why the CIA contracted with the Monroe Institute for the infamous Gateway program, which, if you guys have seen a CIA declassified document on TikTok, it's probably been that document, honestly. It's like almost 30 pages long, and there's a missing page, okay? That was a whole controversy for over 20 years, I want to say. That missing page 25 was literally just nowhere to be found forever. And upon me literally making a FOIA request to the CIA to release that document, they said, we don't have that, go fish. And I was sharing this like update in real time on my TikTok. And again, somebody from the Monroe Institute saw that video and they reached out to me and they were like, we actually have page 25 because we're the ones who wrote it. Like, we contracted with the CIA. We were the original creators of that document. Like, do you want to do like an interview? Like, let's release it. I was like, obviously, yes, let's do that. That's when I got to do the entire interview with Dr. Scott Taylor, who's now actually a mentor of mine. Shout out Dr. Taylor. And he's so great. He answered a lot of questions regarding, you know, the Gateway program specifically. That's still up on my YouTube. You can check out the whole thing. But he now is working for the Shift Network, and he still does a lot with consciousness studies and near-death experiences and things like that. So that's a sidebar. But basically, they released Missing Page 25. It's literally in the link in my bio. You can just click it. It's free. I just needed somewhere to like host the link, you know? So Missing Page 25 is there. I have gone over it on TikTok videos, and subsequent to that interview and everything, they also released it with Vice, I want to say, which I'm going to digress on that topic. But it has been out there and it was released, and there is evidence of it. Like, we've discussed it. We've even gotten Dr. Taylor's perspective on what it means from the missing page, like what all of that means. So check that out if you haven't already. Okay, so now let's go back, because I was talking about the documentary Third Eye Spies, right? With Russell Targ and all of the CIA remote viewing and things like that. Yes, okay. So in that documentary, at the very end, one of the professionals, who I believe was actually an original member of the Stargate team, like working on all of this, he has said in the documentary, you can literally watch this, that there are reports of people that are very connected in this that say this project is still ongoing. Like, this is still going on. Which, like, if you know anything about the government shenanigans, like, that's not even a reach. But what I want to emphasize here with saying that is it's interesting because the official report in, like, I want to say 95 said that the entire Stargate program has, like, no viability, it's useless, a waste of money, whatever. But it ran for 20 years and it was a year by year renewal. Okay. So each and every year they had to show that there was, like, progress in order to be refunded. Let's just leave that there. Not only that, but also, if you actually were to look into these CIA declassified documents, you were to actually read the Stargate files that I'm discussing right now, there is so much evidence that it worked. Like, there's actual images, you can compare the remote viewing, and not to mention, you can try it yourself. Like, there are instructions almost of how to do all the things that they did. And I need to explain that I've done all of this. Like, I have personally gone through these, learned the techniques, tried them for myself to see if they actually worked, and they do. I've had actual confirmation, and I've done this numerous times with a lot of different topics. Like, the Stargate umbrella covers so many things. It's remote viewing, it's meditation, it's, elevation of consciousness. There even includes telepathy, it includes precognition, and all of these different faculties that are kind of lumped into ESP, extrasensory perception, right? People have also, like, I don't know, complained or tried to invalidate all of this by saying it wasn't peer reviewed, which I actually have heard from the members that were on the, like, I'm pretty sure I asked Russell Targ this directly in the interview. I'll have to go back. But yeah, like, they were peer reviewed, for one. But for two, obviously that's not going to be, like, public knowledge if it was a classified operation. The fuck? Anyway, please use brain cells. It's important. Okay, thank you. These are things that you can literally try for yourself and see if they work. That's just how my brain works. Like, I can read it, and of course, obviously, the CIA is, like, a very questionable agency. So naturally, I wanted to understand what was going on. So now I want to address the seeming disconnect, the disconnect here between it works, I've experienced it, and how they've officially stated that it doesn't work, it's not viable. So I have, like, a couple theories as to why that is. Obviously, I don't work for the government, so, like, I can't tell you that for sure. But hearing professionals that worked on the original Stargate program that are still working in this field, by the way, Russell Targ has, like, apps out on the App Store that you can literally practice this stuff. Like, it's out there. My theories as to why this program got shut down. It ran for 20 years, classified, like I mentioned, and then it officially got shut down. There are records, like I just mentioned, from professionals that say the program is still running covertly. Obviously, if it was a classified program still, we wouldn't know about it. Especially in 95. That's when the program got shut down, okay? So anything that started after that, remember, FOIA needs to take 25 years until things can start being approved for release. And that means somebody has to know that it's out there to request it to be released, okay? So we're nearing on like 30 years since 95, which made me want to throw up in my mouth. That's not to say that it didn't start later. That's not to say it's not still classified, because remember, one of the exemptions in the FOIA statute and everything is it won't be declassified if it's used for national security. So that was the big thing. There was like a big push that was like kind of the big premise of studying psychic abilities, at least in the perspective of the government from what I've read, is that it was a threat to national security. Because if you're able to remote view things, like if you actually go into these files or you watch these documentaries, like please do, by the way, but there's evidence where they have done exercises, remote viewing into top secret file cabinets. Like people are able to literally just use their mind to see what's in these file cabinets that are top secret. Like people, nobody should be able to know this. So it has been demonstrated that this is possible. And obviously they wouldn't want to tell you that, because then that, like, you know what I mean? Like they wouldn't like put you on notice of a national security breach, right? Obviously. So, and they said that there was like no defense for any of this. Basically, if you read through the documents, they're like, there's no known defense. Again, at least this is until the program allegedly shut down. So there is no known defense, and people have been able to remote view very classified information, for one. So there is evidence that it works, and that's a huge issue for the government, right? So one of my theories as to like why the program officially got shut down is so one, they could continue the study in like clandestine operations where they don't have to report it because it is still confidential, because it is, you know, related to national security. But obviously in 95, the official report was that none of this worked, even though there was ample evidence over the 20 years prior of this program running that it did work. So that was really interesting, and that gets touched upon in the Third Eye Spies documentary I've been mentioning as well. And feel free to check that out. But it's interesting because the woman who did the report, you know, she's like, I said what I said, basically. And there is evidence that it does work. So it's very confusing where all of this evidence seemingly just doesn't matter now. So one of my theories is that the people that did come in at the back half of that program, a lot of them were very skeptical. They wouldn't even actually look at the documents. They wouldn't look at any of the results. And they just wrote it all off as like fake. So that's like one thing that could have led to that, where it's just like, oh no, that's not real. You know, I'm not even looking at it. It's fake. Just end it. I'm not doing that. So it could be that new people came in and just kind of like shut it all down because of their own dogma. But another thought is that they officially would say that it's useless, doesn't matter, because then people are going to stop looking. They're going to be like, oh, well, you know, it's nothing. It's not real. Like it's declassified. Obviously, if it was real, like it'd still be classified, right? I think that was like kind of one of those like he went that way, but he's actually like right there. Um if that makes any sense. So I feel like it was kind of like a diversion tactic to get people off of their back, especially because the scientists who worked on this project, this program for 20 years of their life, they wanted credit for their work. They couldn't say shit. They couldn't talk about any of this. So obviously, when they officially said, oh, this is nothing, obviously they wanted to out it. And another theory is that they just couldn't figure out exactly the mechanics behind why this worked or how this worked, which, if you read the documents and watch the documentaries and whatnot, that is just the case. That is just what it is. Like, at least according to the documents and everything in the 90s, they still didn't know how or why this worked. And it wasn't down to a science yet. Like they couldn't figure out a way to make it 100% accurate or, you know, replicate it. And that was one of the things. So I don't know if they just said, okay, after 20 years, we still can't figure it out. Like, it's not real, whatever. But I have always been very suspicious that the program has been running in the background. So I'm just going to leave that there. There's a lot of speculation as to like why it stopped and whatnot. But as somebody who has tried all of the stuff in the document, I've connected with a lot of the individuals who have actually worked on like these projects or are still in the realm of psychic things somewhat connected to this project. They're still talking about it. So I'm inclined to believe, since I've experienced it, the professionals who worked on it are still talking about it, that there's definitely something here. That's that. So yeah, once I was getting into the CIA declassified documents and I had already kind of gotten my proof of, wow, this works. Like I've done it for myself. I've read about it. This is fascinating. I realized that a lot of the stuff that they were like researching or citing or whatever came from Eastern cultures or, talking about quantum physics and different theories of how all of this works. So that was my main goal of reading the CIA declassified documents in the first place. So once I kind of got that confirmation, that's when I shifted into more of the quantum physics side of it, looking more into the energy work, connecting with the Eastern cultures in all of this. So that's why I stopped doing the documents. Also, because the CIA's just got some fucking crazy energy. Like, they're not good. Obviously, that's not the energy I wanted to be tapping into, especially since they're citing other sources. So I just kind of like pivoted and went directly to the sources about these things because they predate the CIA. Like, obviously, you can just look that up. And that's why I shifted. But the reason that I'm coming back now and the reason that I'm restarting all of this is because people, A, are still interested. And I realize that a lot of our society is so logic based. And that's the way that I needed to understand how all of this worked. Like my brain wasn't comprehending how I could be experiencing something that allegedly was like not real. You know what I mean? So I needed to reconcile those two things where I'm like, I very clearly have experienced this and I know that like I'm not out of touch with reality. So that's where I need to reconcile how this happens, why this happens, and whatnot. And I realize that a lot of people are probably in the same boat still. And that's why I want to cycle back into the CIA declassified documents. So I'm going to be deep diving again through the documents, going over topics I've already covered, and going very in depth. Feel free to comment any topics that you'd like me to like recover, any questions that you have with any of this, um, anything in general. I'm like, tell me your favorite CIA conspiracy theory if you want. I just watched a documentary about JFK the other day. Don't even get me fucking started. So yeah, anyway, thanks again. See you guys soon.